Welcome to EDO Breakthrough, the podcast where we tackle economic development challenges head on. From small towns to bustling cities, every place has its own hurdles to overcome. The EDO Breakthrough podcast creates an environment of collaboration, innovation, and understanding where we can share our real-life challenges and brainstorm solutions. I'm your host, Sandy Dubé, a certified economic developer and founder of PPR Strategies. Each week, we'll be welcoming a different, brilliant, place-based mind to talk through real-life economic development challenges that have been shared with us by you, our gracious listeners. Well, welcome back to the EDO Breakthrough podcast, where we explore the ideas, the people, and the strategies shaping the future of economic development. I'm your host, Sandy Dubé, and I'm joined by my PPR Strategies team member and creative director, Meg Boyle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to see the inner workings of EDO Breakthrough, behind the curtain, if you will.
Yeah, you've been able to see obviously everything after production and have helped us to promote it and to share some of these stories and do all the things. So now we've got you in the proverbial hot seat, I guess, ready for the questions for today.
Oh boy. All right, bring it on.
It'll be so good. But yeah, Meg, I was describing Meg this morning in a meeting, and with the title of creative director, everybody has, different thoughts and ideas as to what that means. And I said, oh, Meg's creative superpower is writing, but you also have, so much other bits of experience and are turning into or have turned into this beautiful economic development communicator. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners what a little bit about you and how you came to be here and a little bit of your journey and the journey that you like to take our clients on.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. That's a lovely intro. So I've been writing professionally for about 25 years, and it really started with a love of writing fused with a love of advocacy. I started working in mission-driven nonprofit organizations, really elevating women and girls in DC. And as you know, one thing leads to another. Certainly in nonprofit or economic development, someone sees, oh, you're a good writer, but you're also really great with people. So, why don't you take on some advocacy? Or, oh, I see that you're the person in the office who really knows how to work the fax machine. Yes, I'm that old. So why don't you do that too? Or why don't you create this initiative that organizes our volunteers in a different way? So essentially, I became very good at wearing many hats early on, but writing really was my passion. So kind of followed that trajectory into kind of continuing to work with mission-driven nonprofits. Eventually, I found my way into philanthropy and philanthropy writing. Working specifically with, all girls schools with really just, small budgets and really amazing missions, to, working with foundations and essentially, finding my way into economic development through a mutual connection that Sandy and I had. I had the opportunity to work as an alumni director for one of the PPR clients. Am I allowed to name her on the show?
Sure. Yes. Say it. Do it.
Pam Ruff, because you know that she loves. You know that Pam Ruff of MEDA loves, and thrives and craves the spotlight at all times. But when I was working as the alumni director at Pam's school and I was transitioning into having my son, she said, do you do any ghostwriting? And could you do some for economic development? And I said, well, I'm not really clear on exactly what economic development is, but I know that I love to write and I know that I can do it with some level of, conviction. So why don't we give this a go? And fast forward to doing some work with MEDA as a ghostwriter. and really finding my way into the stories that really make economic development tick. So just learning some of the players in these amazing programs and projects that have really just elevated the region, and I was hooked. So that's really the story, and that's how I met Sandy.
So good. And yes, it's been a minute that we've been hanging out in this space.
Yes. I said
And
fax machine, so that's how
I
long it's been.
yes, we will have a link in the show notes as to what a fax machine is, maybe with a photo. I did have a team member at one point actually had to Google the word facsimile because they didn't know what it was. So that made me feel old, but it totally cracked me up at the same time. So. But that's interesting, and I love kind of that learning of seldom does somebody is somebody born saying that they want to be an economic developer. So you have come through that path in your own way, and now are yes helping to really tell authentic stories, true, lovely, sometimes technical, sometimes not, stories about community and place and the resources, the partners in and around this economic development industry and ecosystem. I'm curious when sit down to kind of do this authentic writing and, immerse yourself in place. What is that process for you to think about it when you're maybe not there sitting at the town square, but you're trying to make it out like you are?
So for me, and the process really has been really to it's very method. It's really there have been projects that I have worked on when I have, been living in rural England. But my job is to immerse myself in the lush hills of Piedmont, Virginia. So I think it's really getting yourself into the headspace as a user or reader or someone who consumes information and saying, what is it that I want to feel? What is it that I want to walk away with? And trying to put yourself in the shoes of that person that's either a first time economic developer who is starting out their career and doesn't have the resources, or someone who is a tourist who's saying, I'm looking to go on a really amazing 3-day trip and I need a really, really exciting itinerary. So putting yourself in the shoes of different audiences is really what gets me excited and I think makes me an effective storyteller.
Yeah, actually that was a part of the conversation that I had this morning as well with a prospective client was talking about how challenging it can be, particularly to teach that skill. That not every audience is just like me. Not every audience, not everybody that we're trying to reach is a 50-year-old, white woman living in, the suburbs of Washington, D.C. But we, get in and, kind of lean in and figure out who that audience is and how it's going to be relatable and figure out their pain points and, their problem and what we're trying to do as a potential solution for them. So it is really interesting that nuance of like diving deep and understanding what your target audience is what they're thinking and feeling.
And I think the other piece of it too is really being true to your client. And I think that's a huge piece of it and really true to that client voice. And as writers, I think one of the hardest things that writers can do is edit themselves because you craft every sentence with such love and conviction. And it's very difficult to sometimes pull it back and say, you know what, how do I make this really complex sentence fit the client better? How do I dial back the language so that we are really getting down to brass tacks? And that's something that's really important to do. So I think that that's also a skill that's learned over time is really being passionate about storytelling, but also knowing when it's appropriate to really lean in and when you need to take that kind of, more distanced kind of third person perspective and tell a narrative that may feel a little more distanced because that is really what's appropriate to the client's voice and audience. It's trial by error, but I think it's something that you really need to refine over time. And you need to be really committed to the process of being hard on yourself and editing a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm thinking about economic development and keep going back to philanthropy, and whether we're telling a story of a place, through that tourism or economic development, lens, or workforce development, whatever that happens to be, whatever that place-based story is, or philanthropy, you're telling a story of those donor dollars and where they're going and the problem that you're trying to solve. Is your approach similar? Thinking about your target audience, whether you're writing for a nonprofit, telling about that organization, or you're kind of immersing as if you are that place.
100%. Yes, and that's why I think effective storytellers are really able to, especially transition between the philanthropic space and the nonprofit space, because the economic development space and the nonprofit space, because at the end of the day, you're communicating possibility. What is possible if this project comes to fruition? What is possible if this initiative raises $2 million, to elevate the state of childcare in a certain community? It's about people seeing what's possible, but it's also knowing that your audience is savvy. And by using flowery language, that's just not what it's about. It's about really being practical with your sentence structure and your language and having an authentic tone of voice where you are able to tell that story in a way where people say, you know what? I can see this happening. I can see myself being part of this magic.
So nowadays we keep asking people, we're always, you and I, we're always looking for writers, freelance or full time, to join the team because it is the lost art. But so often the answer that I get when I ask a colleague, now in 2025, do you know any writers looking for work? Everybody inevitably says, oh yeah, that Claude or that Gemini or that ChatGPT. That's it. That's all you need. Um, how do you respond? I know how I respond. How do you respond when somebody poses that as an alternative to hiring a human?
I think that no matter what, when it comes to strategic communication, you can plug in a prompt over Chat GPT or Claude and they can make things sound human. But the actual approach to a project, especially if it's a creative project, you're not going to get the same effect as someone who really stewards your brand, understands your audience, understands all of those touch points that make your brand and your message special. And that's the difference. You can easily use Chat GPT or Claude or any other open AI source to refine a sentence. But at the end of the day, to make a whole strategy come alive, that's something that a human can only do and do with precision and passion.
Mm, how lovely.
Thanks.
That's a beautiful response. Um, and something that the other piece before we kind of go down, many of these different rabbit holes that we'll talk about during our conversation today. But talk to our listeners about a creative director and what a creative director does. The Again, this conversation I had recently, I had said, "Oh, Meg is not a graphic designer creatively. She is a
Oh,
whiz with
funny.
the
That never
pen."
occurred to
Yeah,
me yeah. Oh,
yeah.
too funny.
So,
Yes.
yeah, so I'm always very quick to say that is your superpower, is the written word, not, designing a flyer to look pretty, but by golly, the words will pop off the page. And so, what does creative director mean to you? And this could be an opportunity for you to talk about some of the team members that you get to work with on a regular basis that
For
our
sure.
listeners have heard, perhaps.
Absolutely. Well, I would say, again, it's a completely team driven process, but being a creative director is really about taking the seeds of a great idea and stewarding that process. And that stewardship is really something that happens through so many members of our team really touching the process. So whether it's having that story told through website copy, whether it's through media relations, whether it's through social media, any type of e-newsletter. So essentially, it's like a trajectory that starts with the ideation and then ends with the deliverable that every member of the PPR Strategies team touches and really invests themselves in. And that's really the process. So I like to think that I and really like a steward of the process, and really nurturing it along is something that I love to do, but it's definitely a collective lift and a collective responsibility that we all take seriously on our team.
Yeah, that is interesting. I had a conversation this morning with one of our colleagues who had said, "Oh, I know that the client doesn't want to hear this, but I need to tell them this. Is that okay?" And so yes, I'm curious. I don't know if you've got a story or an example or some tips to share when you have to provide some of that honest communications, but it could change the trajectory of a project, and anything, advice on providing constructive feedback?
I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that our clients have many choices for counsel and advice, and they come to us. So the first thing that we need to do as advisors is really be experts in our subject matter, and not only be experts in our subject matter, really believe in the power of our own experience. I think as women, that's not always easy to do. And I really am speaking for myself as a middle-aged woman, and feeling as if sometimes you feel like you need to apologize for maybe coming across as being direct. What I've learned is that our clients value the directness where it's appropriate, because it's really why they hire us, is for us to have that specific expert lens on a problem and a solution. So, yeah, I have many instances of it in my career. And I would say that there were some early on where I would just nod my head and say, absolutely, I understand your position, and feel frustrated after I got off a call because I said, I really had an opinion to share, and I didn't because I was afraid of maybe it not being fully fleshed out, or maybe it not being 100% the right pathway. But what I've learned is that certainly in marketing and communications and economic development, people trust you because they know that you have their best intentions at heart and they trust your expertise. And, sometimes there may be a journey and there may be some bumps on the journey, but I think as long as you really, look at things from an analytical perspective, and you really pay attention to what that journey looks like, things very rarely go off the rail. So I'd say certainly believing in yourself, doing good research, doing good analysis, and being really communicative and candid just along the process of a project, because no one has all the answers. If we did, we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Yeah, if it was just that easy, you're right.
Yeah.
Kind of anybody could do it. And, oh, golly, we're not we're not curing cancer. We here and this, kind of storytelling for economic development or strategic planning for economic development or workforce or tourism. But, it is important work because it does impact kind of I love this word the trajectory of a community and how they are going to grow, who they're going to attract for growth, either those business owners or the talent that wants to live and work in that community.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also just wanted to say, I know it was a few years back, but there was one particular tourism client where we had a really out of the box idea on specific itineraries that would appeal, just to different types of folks, certainly that would be interested in visiting their community. And, it felt at the time like a pretty out of the box idea. And we designed these really just very curated but awesome itineraries for whether it was a day trip or a weekend stay or, an afternoon, of craft brews and dog walks. But it's one of those things where I think that if a client trusts that we, can take them on this journey and that we will adjust our methodology as we need to, it's going to be okay. But I think that trust is a big piece, and really knowing that you are in the capable hands of advisors who really have your best interests at heart. That is really, what creates the magic.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to shift gears slightly. And one of the things that a lot of our listeners, not all of our listeners, but a lot of our listeners are kind of relatively new to economic development. And so as somebody that isn't working in, or you've never worked in an actual economic development office,
Never.
which
Nope.
is awesome. But you are still learning and absorbing, and you've been to conferences and you've done things and you read, articles and websites and all sorts of things. I didn't mean to just give you all those answers, but how do you learn? How are you figuring it all out? Any advice that you have for some listeners that are thinking, wow, yeah, okay, I can relate to Meg. I like marketing. I like writing. But I don't know about this product that I'm supposed to be marketing. Where do I start? Any advice?
I would say from a writing perspective, just off the bat, not even economic development, if anyone would like to be a better writer, the best thing that you can do is be an avid reader. So for me, I am a real nerd. I get very excited, this, Andy, about sentence structure and in just language in general. So I think having that excitement for what writing looks like and what good writing looks like, and that appreciation is number one. And I'd say number two is probably, when it comes to economic development in general, just really, leaning into publications, whether it is local publications, podcasts on the subject, INC Magazine, Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes. Find out what's going on in the world that you live in on a broad scale, but then take that really micro approach into your own community. I mean, look at Nextdoor. I mean, whatever it is to really understand the rhythms and the challenges in your community, just consume information. And it's almost like osmosis. The more that you consume, the more that you become informed, and then you can speak from a place of knowledge. And I think that that's really important. And it's not only, looking at one type of publication that may have a specific bias, but it's listening. It's listening to your neighbors and to their challenges, and, listening to, your spouse or your best friend and some of the dynamics that they are encountering maybe in their workplace or in the job search. And I think once you consume that, you become a more informed communicator because you really, really care about the world and the community that you live in.
Mm-hmm. So if I listen to podcasts, that's one step towards being a better podcast producer or podcast. I don't even know what I am. A podcast host? What am
Yes.
I think I'm a host. Yeah.
Yes. I believe that 100%. I do. Cool. Because you may not do it intentionally, or you may not, but they're going to pay things that you
Yeah.
pick up, whether it's the segues that Jason Bateman has on Smartlist with Will
Mm.
Arnett. There's just
Mhm.
going to be different cadence that you pick up on, and you think, you know what? I'm going to make that my own in a different way. And it's
Mhm.
just something that you do. And it's definitely a beautiful form of flattery if it ends up working for you.
So it's funny that you say Jason Bateman. I'm just going to say Jason Bateman one more time, maybe two more times. Just
Maybe
Jason
three.
Bateman. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So just to put a smile on my face, just cause. And maybe he'll hear this because we'll tag him in it, and then he'll want for me to be a guest on their show, and then he'll have to be a guest on our
Obviously.
show. And so, la 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 la, we could talk about,
Mm-hmm.
Ozark and place-based, what that did to that region, of the country,
Exactly.
things like that. Oh my God, there's so many things we could talk about. I could talk about with Jason Bateman. Okay, sorry. We had to get back to you, Meg. Okay, so yes, I think
No,
you're
it's
right. Those are
fine, really.
great
I'm happy to talk about
suggestions.
Jason Bateman, but okay.
Great suggestions, and thinking about that idea of immersing yourself in the piece and your sentence structure. Oh my gosh, the note that I wrote down was voice docs. I was not going to go into our grammar minutes that you get so geeked out about. And
I
yesterday's
do.
grammar minute was about the Oxford comma, in case anybody is
Very
curious.
passionate about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is so good. So yes, on the PPR team, every week we have an all hands team meeting, and we have tech minute, a grammar minute, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
an economic development minute where we have
Yes, we
learned
do.
a thing, a trend, something, and
It's great.
it's awesome. It's not all like, hey, here's this new AI based platform anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is good old fashioned commas and
Mm-hmm.
why and how, and just a sheer love for all the things. So it was funny.
Yes.
It's funny.
Yes. And I think what's great about it is that these are sometimes things that as communicators, we want to know the why, but maybe we don't want to ask the question because we feel like we should already know the answer. And a lot of times, when it comes to something stylistic like an Oxford comma, it comes down to certainly we follow a certain style guide, or this is a client preference. And it can really be as simple as that. But sometimes talking these things through is really important because not everyone loves to, is as self-deprecating, Sandy, as you or I. I could talk all day about my foibles and mishaps. I feel like I go through life really as a 40 something year old Bridget Jones. But sometimes it's harder for other people to find the words to say, I don't understand. Can you just explain this to me? Because no question really is a dumb question. And I fully believe that.
Okay, so is this the time you said Bridget Jones? Do I bring up Renee Zellweger and the fifth season of Only Murders in the Building and the Only Murders in the Building podcast, and then bring it back to the EDO Breakthrough? I'm not sure. That was my whole plan there. But if
Yeah,
Steve
that
Martin
is.
or anybody would like to, hang out on this podcast, again, apparently I'm just full of shout outs today. So,
I know. I was going to say, or Martin Short,
oh,
Meryl Streep. Yeah,
any of them.
absolutely.
Any of them. Selena
You're
Gomez, she might
welcome.
still be on her honeymoon or something. Fine.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yes.
And we can talk about, I was going to say, we need to find like a really specific angle, but really, I think, the angle could be placemaking and true crime and tourism and how all of those things come together in a way that, certainly creates synergy as if New York City needed any more. So.
Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. Cool, 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 cool. But getting back to, I don't know why I'm feeling so distracted, or a little. The squirrels keep running by my head, and I'm listening. Oh, when you think about grammar and sentence structure and word choice, and style guides and things like that. One of the things that we help our clients with are, we talk about like a brand guideline, and having those brand guidelines have a voice accompaniment to it of, that dictates kind of that word choice, words we use that we don't use, so that that tone is consistent, regardless of who on the team is writing for you. And when you are a community and you are, I'm not writing as Sandy, I'm writing as, Anytown USA, representative of, and making sure that whether you're writing or I'm writing, or our intern is writing, that it's consistent. Can you talk a little bit about the process and kind of maybe why it's important to have some of these voice docs and creating that brand voice?
Sure. I think it really all goes down to the fact that everybody likes a framework.
Mm,
And I think a framework is really important. And, certainly from when you're talking about a company or an organization that may evolve over time. And it's very important because over the life of a company or an organization, you have different team members who come into the story of that organization. And it's really important that everyone understands, a baseline of, this is how we speak about the company. This is an important way for us, to engage on social media. This is, these are some of the descriptors that we use to invest others really in the work that we do and why it's important. So it can voice docs and brand guidelines are really important because it can really touch on the nuances of why we prefer the comma to the M dash, or why we refer to ourselves as the X organization instead of we. These are just important ways for, I think, communication to become uniform and to be standardized no matter who is communicating within the organization. And I think it's really, really important. And the same certainly goes for brand guidelines. Editorial and brand guidelines are really at the heart of building effective communication, because it's so important that we're all using the correct iteration of a logo in the correct way, because we all understand, certainly we can recognize Lululemon or we can recognize Nike based on that effective branding. And I think that everyone needs a North Star for communication in their organization or company. And voice docs and brand guidelines really are that North Star.
yes, I know that it definitely it helps. You're right, to kind of get the things on paper. And I can't remember everything all the time. So I've got this resource, I've got this tool. What the other piece that I like about it generally is that it is an evolution. So it's
Yes.
just like a website. Your website is not something that you do one time and then walk away, and 20 years later, you touch it again. And your voice doc and your brand guidelines should be the same, where they're
Yes.
evolving, right?
Yeah, and I think as your organization evolves, it is really a living, breathing document, and it's something that you should be able to revisit. But it just gives people a platform for understanding really how to tell your story and what's appropriate and frankly what's not.
Mhm. Cool. One of the things I love is to give our listeners a tip or two. Do you have any suggestions or ideas of things that they should start doing today, or something, a challenge that you can give them that will help them to communicate more effectively in the future?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. So one is for written communication, and that is read your work out loud. It is so important, and you would not believe what you are able to detect when whether it's a board report or it is an annual report or it is a blog post, you are able to pick up typos, but also areas where maybe you should, use a comma, or where a sentence is too long. And for me, I do it in terms of breath. and I don't mean to get too much like a yogi where we're getting into this, but really, if you have a sentence that is spanning 2 to 3 lines, really complex, and you're struggling to get through that sentence, you're going to notice it when you read it out loud, and you're going to want to structure that differently. So read your work out loud. And then when it comes to oral communication, I think it's really important to be warm and be relatable, and really to ask good questions of the people you work with and of your clients. What would be most supportive of you right now, I think, is a great one. And I think sometimes we don't always, want to like hear a long, newfangled solution, but like we just want the platform to be able to say, I'm scared to go in this direction because it's X amount of my budget. And what if this goes wrong? And I think when you're authentic and when you acknowledge the risks that someone may be taking on by doing something a little bit differently, it really helps you get to an end result that feels comfortable for everyone. So I think, yeah. So certainly being authentic and just asking really thoughtful questions and wanting really to engage in that dialogue with a client or with a teammate is just really is what moves you forward.
Awesome. Great suggestions. Cool. I'm curious because, well, we talk every day. We did not prepare for this like we might have otherwise. But I'm curious if there was something that you were thinking like, oh, I hope Sandy asks me about because I definitely want to talk about it. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about?
That's a great question. I would say probably one of the most important things to communicating well is really to love what you do and to really lean into it. And I think it's so important because let's face it, a lot of business facing writing can sometimes be a bit dry.
What?
But I think I'm sorry. I'm
Shocking.
sorry to break it to you. I am so sorry. But I think if you think about the bigger picture of, what is possible if you create this amazing tourism campaign, or what is possible through this neighborhood revitalization, even if you are drafting, the copy for some social media posts, I think that if you think about just really like what that could do, what the possibility is, I think it's so important, and it makes sometimes those less exciting tasks feel like they're part of something so much more important because they are. And that's something that really really powers me, and I personally consider it a challenge. And this, Sandy, if I'm given like a really challenging project, how to make something really complex really seem relatable. And I love being able to do that because it always can be done. And I firmly believe that.
Wow, there's some good encouragement. Thank you for that. It was funny 'cause while you were talking, I was thinking, we always kind of think back and reflect on a younger version of self, and what would my 20 something version of self be doing right now?
For
That's a
sure.
conversation for a whole other podcast. But I'm curious if there is advice or ideas or thoughts that you would give to yourself, or give to some of our listeners that maybe you thought, oh, I wish I had done that differently when I was younger, or because of something with team dynamics, or we've got a couple of different generations in the office,
Yeah.
on the team and everything, and within clients. Any thoughts in terms of something that you wish you'd learned earlier, or advice that you would give yourself?
Yeah. And this is something that I really take to heart because I am a middle aged mom. And there were many years where my husband was the primary breadwinner and I was freelancing, and I remained freelancing for PPR Strategies, which really was incredibly empowering to me and, certainly to my family. But what I want to say about that is during those years, there were moments where it felt really isolating to not have a team around me every day, or to worry about how I would, re-enter the workforce, or what that would look like, or if I had just lost years in my career. And what I would like to say to that woman, who at the time was, 31 years old with a chubby baby boy on her hip, was just keep doing what you love and be true to it. Keep your resume current, whether you are working consistently or doing a few projects a year. Lean in on other activities and volunteer elements that can certainly round out your experience, and it will come together if you put yourself in a place where you have a good network and you're hungry to learn and you're willing to dive in with your mind and your heart.
I hope our listeners can hear the passion that I hear and, and that I see in you every day. It's lovely. It's so fun to get to work with you every day. And
Likewise.
we have very different backgrounds and very different experiences, but also like super shared goals, and we might like come from very different perspectives, but yeah, so much love and respect. I really, really appreciate you joining us today on this podcast. Not your go-to format, I know, but thank you.
No, I'm usually just the person behind the curtain who keeps things moving and who writes the things. So it's interesting to be, certainly in this seat, but it's really just felt like an incredible honor. So thank you.
No, thank you. So, as you may recall, everybody seems to forget when they get in the hot seat. The final question that we ask all of our listeners is, what was your economic development breakthrough?
My economic development breakthrough actually, I think, happened pretty recently. It did. It
Yeah, that's
happened
good. Okay.
yes, it happened at a client conference. And I would say it was a very kind of big marketing lead up to this very exciting, but also, very ambitious 1,000-person plus event. And I think my ability to really help the team and help our team understand the importance of this going off so incredibly well, and us making sure that the folks on the podium really felt comfortable what was going to happen, and that the AV team really understood, certainly the next steps, and that everyone felt really, really comfortable with the outcome. I think was something that I realized was just a big breakthrough for me, that I would be in the seat of producing something that really, I think, inspired hearts and minds and got people excited about our craft. That to me felt like a real breakthrough. So, yes, I think it's possible to have breakthroughs in your late 40s. And for me, I would say it was that particular conference.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I know that was something you were getting out of your comfort zone a little bit too, and I applaud you for doing that. And not only like leaning in, you just jumped in, head, feet first, all things, and really gave it your all, and it showed. I think that I know I appreciated you being there. The client loved you being there. It was so good.
It was fun. And I think what I learned, one of my biggest takeaways was that it's so much easier to be behind a screen and to communicate over the phone and over Zoom and behind a laptop. But when someone comes to you and you need to fix something or you need to act, that is a muscle that you need to develop very quickly. And I think that I realized that I always had it in me. It just wasn't something I was using every day. So that was my breakthrough.
Yay, that's amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I mean, so many, insights and experiences, and I don't even think we revealed anything, damaging or dangerous for any secrets for either of us. So that's great.
No, maybe we talked a little bit about Jason Bateman,
Uh,
but I think, I just
why
think, there's a universal there because he's just seems to be a lovely human. So yeah.
It's good, right? But I love this idea of, being really intentional and, kind of leaning in and immersing yourselves in that experience. And truly, so I hope our listeners are learning a little bit more about PPR strategies, kind of a little behind the curtain, whether it's, in the storytelling, some of this community engagement, strategic communications, all of the layers of what we do are out there. We did not pause for a commercial break, but if you are interested, we certainly would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear feedback. If you've got a review, we encourage you to leave a review here on this episode, or check out any of the others. Refer this podcast to a colleague that you think would enjoy the conversation. And with all of that, Meg Boyle, thank you so much. I am Sandy Dubé, your host here at the EDO Breakthrough, and I thank you all for listening. Until next time. The EDO Breakthrough podcast is brought to you by PPR Strategies. PPR Strategies, standing for People and Places Reimagined, is a strategic consulting firm working specifically with EDOs and other place-based organizations. We share the unique stories of communities through communication, strategic planning, marketing, media relations, and more. Visit us at pprstrategies.com and find our contact information in the show notes. I'd like to give a big thank you to you for listening. Remember, together we are unstoppable.